My mother was the Queen for a very long time. And although you kind of know that this might happen, you don't really think about it very much. Not least of all because the monarchy is about continuity.
Queen Camilla stole the late Queen's tiara from Buckingham Palace and had a fake made to replace it, so that Princess Catherine would be publicly humiliated in front of the entire world. This happened inside the most secure building in Britain, hours before a global state gala, and the royal family had to make a decision in real time about how to handle it without letting the cameras outside smell a single drop of blood. What you are about to hear is the full story. Every move, every miscalculation, and every consequence. Because this was not a disagreement between two women over jewelry. This was a coordinated act of sabotage against the Princess of Wales. And when it collapsed in the most devastating way possible, right in front of the people Camilla needed most to impress. Princess Catherine on one side, Queen Camilla on the other, and between them, a piece of jewelry so historically loaded, so symbolically potent, that whoever wore it before the international cameras would be sending a message that no speech, no press release, and no carefully worded palace statement could ever match. This is the story of how Buckingham Palace nearly watched its own carefully constructed image detonate from within, and how one woman's composure under fire may have saved the monarchy from its most embarrassing public collapse in living memory. Let us begin where all palace crises begin, not with a shout, but with a whisper. The occasion was a state gala of enormous geopolitical significance. A prominent world leader was to be hosted at Buckingham Palace, and the eyes of the international press were already trained on every entrance, every doorway, every carefully chosen detail of the evening's presentation. In moments like these, the British royal family does not simply show up, they perform. Every element, from the table arrangements to the flowers to the precise order in which individuals enter a room, is a deliberate communication to the world about stability, continuity, and power. It was in this pressure cooker atmosphere that a seemingly contained internal dispute began quietly pulling at a thread that, if fully unraveled, threatened to bring down the entire evening with it. Camilla, Queen Consort, made a request. By most accounts, it was not framed as a request at all. It was closer to an expectation. She wished to wear the Rose of Windsor tiara, one of the most storied and recognizable pieces in the royal collection, a jewel inextricably linked to the memory and legacy of the late Queen Elizabeth II. For Camilla, wearing that tiara on a night when the world was watching would have meant something profound. It would have been a visual declaration, a statement worn on her head and broadcast to billions that she had fully and irreversibly and legitimately stepped into the role that so many within the public and within the institution itself have questioned whether she truly deserves. The request went to Princess Anne. And Princess Anne, who has spent decades navigating the precise choreography of palace life without ever losing her footing, did not flinch. She did not express outrage. She did not engage in the kind of dramatic confrontation that Camilla may have anticipated or even welcomed. She simply stated with the clean economy of someone who has no interest in unnecessary theater that the tiara was not available. It was currently in the care of the royal jewelers, undergoing essential maintenance work. End of conversation. Door closed. Camilla accepted this answer on the surface. She nodded, she walked away. Those around her may have been briefly fooled into thinking the matter had been resolved. It had not been resolved. It had only been postponed. because within hours, information began moving through the palace, as information always does in environments where knowledge is currency, and what reached Camilla's ears was not maintenance updates or jewelry schedules. What reached her was something far inflammatory. Word began spreading, carried on the invisible current of palace gossip, that Princess Anne's inner circle was not simply maintaining the Rose of Windsor tiara, they were considering allowing Princess Catherine to wear it for the gala. Let that land for a moment, because within the specific, high-stakes language of royal symbolism, this was not a wardrobe decision, this was a verdict. If Catherine appeared before a visiting head of state and the assembled international media wearing that particular jewel, the one most visually and emotionally tied to Elizabeth, it would communicate something that transcended fashion entirely. It would signal institutional endorsement. It would say, without a single spoken word, that the palace's inner circle viewed Catherine as the continuity of something sacred, the keeper of a legacy, the woman who, in the eyes of those who matter most within these walls, embodied what the late queen had built and what the monarchy needed to project to the world. And for Camilla, who has spent years fighting to prove that her place in this family is legitimate and not merely tolerated, that image would have been devastating. Not privately devastating, publicly, permanently, photographically devastating. The change that came over Camilla in the hours that followed was not loud. It never is with people who carry real power. She did not make speeches, she did not make scenes, but those paying close attention noticed something shift behind her eyes. A door closed internally, a calculation began. Meanwhile, Catherine was navigating the day in the way she has learned, through years of extraordinary and often brutal experience, is the only viable way to navigate days like this, by being invisible in all the ways that mattered and luminous in all the ways the cameras would catch. She had heard of the tiara situation, she understood its implications better than almost anyone else, but she had also been in this family long enough to know that the most dangerous thing she could do on a day this charged was to appear to care too much about any single element of it. In palace warfare, desire is vulnerability. The moment you show that something matters to you, you have handed your opponent exactly what they need to hurt you with it. So Catherine moved through her preparations with deliberate calm. She spoke to staff with quiet clarity. She did not ask unnecessary questions. She did not send signals in any direction. She was playing the long game, the only game she had come to understand a woman in her position can afford to play. But even as she maintained that composure, she was processing, and what she was processing did not feel like opportunity, it felt like danger. Because Catherine understood that the tiara, if it came to her, would not be an uncomplicated gift, it would also be a target. In an environment already crackling with tension, appearing in that jewel would require her to be absolutely flawless in every other dimension of the evening. One misplaced expression, one moment of visible stress, one photograph that could be interpreted in the wrong direction, and the tiara on her head would transform from a symbol of trust into evidence of overreach. The tabloids do not need facts, they need frames, and she was very aware of how quickly a frame could be built around a woman who wore the wrong thing on the wrong night. She looked at the empty space on her dressing table. She was not thinking about gold and diamonds, she was thinking about survival. What nobody anticipated, not the security team, not the palace staff, not Princess Anne, and certainly not Catherine, was that events were already in motion that would make every other concern in the palace feel for a terrible few hours entirely secondary. The Rose of Windsor tiara disappeared. It vanished the way things vanish in nightmares, not dramatically, not with noise, but simply and completely. One moment, it was being transported along a secure, familiar internal route. The next, the sealed box arrived at its destination and was found to contain nothing. No signs of forced entry, no signs of a struggle, no alarms triggered, no unauthorized personnel detected, no breach in any of the procedures that were supposed to make such a thing categorically impossible. The first reaction among those who discovered the empty box was not panic. It was something colder and more paralyzing than panic. It was the silent recognition that this was not an accident. Accidents have messy edges, confused timelines, multiple possible explanations. This had none of those. This was clean, and in security terms, clean is the most frightening outcome of all, because it means someone knew exactly what they were doing, and they had the access and the knowledge and the patience to do it without leaving fingerprints. The palace went into immediate lockdown, not the visible, chaotic kind that would have sent the assembled press corps into a feeding frenzy, the quiet kind. Exits secured without drama, access logs pulled and scrutinized, surveillance footage retrieved and placed under urgent review, staff movements in the relevant window of time reconstructed minute by minute. Catherine received the news while deep into her final preparations. The message was delivered quietly, and the messenger departed immediately. She went still for a moment. Not frozen, but still in the way that very composed people go still when they are rapidly running through scenarios. And the scenario unfolding behind her eyes was not a pleasant one. She understood her position with painful clarity. If the jewelry did not reappear, the evening would require a substitution. And if that substitution attracted any attention, if any question was raised about authenticity or origin, Catherine would be exposed to a narrative that required no evidence to take hold. In the court of public opinion, and more specifically in the tabloid ecosystem that orbited the royal family like a permanent cloud of hungry satellites, a woman does not need to have done something wrong to be destroyed by the suggestion that she might have. She only needs to be standing in the wrong place, on the wrong night, wearing the wrong thing. The trap, if it was a trap, was exquisitely constructed. Security moved through the surveillance footage with the focused intensity of people who understood exactly what was at stake, not just for the missing jewelry, but for the entire institution. And what they found did not give them comfort. The footage was largely clean and unbroken, no unexpected figures, no signs of struggle or haste. But there was one gap, brief, almost surgical, a small window in the camera coverage where a single angle had been effectively bypassed, creating a blind spot just wide enough for a box to pass through without being recorded. It was the kind of gap that does not happen by accident. It requires specific knowledge of the system's architecture and a deliberate decision to exploit it. Someone inside the palace, someone with detailed familiarity of how the security infrastructure operated, had engineered a moment of blindness inside what was supposed to be the most protected environment in Britain. When Princess Anne entered the room where the investigation was being coordinated, the atmosphere became several degrees more serious. She does not traffic in reassurance when reassurance is not warranted. She asked a single, precise question. Who had physical access to the box during that specific interval? Every name on the list was circled. Every person associated with those names was cross-referenced. The net began to tighten. Catherine remained at a careful remove from all of this. She understood, without needing it explained, that proximity to the investigation carried its own risks. In environments where narrative is weaponized, even innocent curiosity can be repackaged as suspicious interest. She continued her preparations, she spoke when spoken to, she gave nothing away. But internally, she was doing something that she had become very good at over the years. She was assembling a picture from the fragments available to her, and the picture that was assembling itself was not abstract or ambiguous. It had a very clear shape. Camilla wanted the tiara,
Anne had refused, the rumor spread that Catherine would wear it, and now the tiara was gone. A coincidence has ragged edges. This had none. The investigation's reach extended beyond the palace walls, and that was the moment that changed everything. Security teams, following the trail with the methodical discipline of people who are very practiced at finding things that powerful people do not wish to be found, arrived at a residential address outside the palace, the home of Laura Lopez, Camilla's daughter. The silence that followed the mention of that name in the room where Princess Anne and the senior investigation team had gathered was the kind of silence that carries more information than most conversations. Nobody needed to say what everyone in the room was thinking. If the trail led to Laura Lopez, then the shadow behind Laura Lopez was not difficult to identify.
What the team found at the property removed any remaining possibility of innocent explanation. The Rose of Windsor tiara was there, not hidden in a rush, not concealed in a way that suggested panic or improvisation. It had been stored with care, waiting, as if its temporary relocation to that address was not the end of a plan, but a step within one. And alongside the tiara, the investigators found something that transformed a serious situation into a devastating one. Evidence of a replica. Not a casual imitation, not something that would fool anyone up close, but a high-quality, expertly crafted reproduction prepared with the kind of meticulous attention to detail that speaks to significant time, resources, and intention. Someone had studied precisely how the gala lighting would interact with the surfaces of the original piece. Someone had commissioned a copy designed to pass, at least under the specific conditions of that evening, as the real thing. The plan, when the investigators laid out what they had found, was almost breathtaking in its ambition and its cruelty. The original tiara would have been quietly swapped for the replica. Catherine would have worn it without knowing. The cameras would have captured it. And at some carefully chosen moment, perhaps that evening, perhaps days or weeks later when the maximum damage could be inflicted, the truth would have been released. Catherine, the woman who had worn a fake on one of the most visible nights in the royal calendar, Catherine, who had stood before a world leader and an international press corps with a counterfeit piece of the late Queen's collection resting on her head? No accusation would need to have been made directly. The image alone would have been enough. The questions would have written themselves. Had she known? Had she arranged it? Was this carelessness or was this arrogance? In the tabloid universe, the distinction between those possibilities matters far less than the photograph. Laura Lopez, when confronted with the evidence, did not have her mother's composure. She had not spent decades learning the particular and demanding art of revealing nothing under pressure. The palace mask, perfected through years of relentless public exposure, was not something Laura had been trained to wear, and so what the investigators saw in her reaction confirmed everything that the physical evidence had already told them. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not a prank carried out without awareness of consequences. This was an operation, and it had been directed from somewhere very close to the center of the royal family itself. The evidence was brought to Clarence House. Princess Anne carried it with the bearing of someone who understands that what they are holding is not just proof of a crime, but the potential beginning of a constitutional crisis. When King Charles saw what had been laid before him, something in his expression changed in a way that those present would not forget quickly. For a moment, the architecture of a king's composure slipped, and what was visible underneath was simply a man confronting the reality that the jealousy living inside his own household had crossed a line that could not be walked back from. His first instinct was categorical: remove Camilla from the evening entirely, erase her presence from the night, communicate through the imagery of her absence exactly how seriously the institution viewed what had been discovered. William intervened. Not because he was protecting Camilla. Anyone in that room who believed that was misreading the situation entirely. William intervened because he understood, with the tactical clarity of someone who has spent his entire adult life watching the machinery of royal public relations operate under extreme pressure, that a last-minute, unexplained absence by the Queen Consort on the night of a major state gala would not contain the story. It would ignite it. The press, already positioned outside and already primed for any signal of disorder, would not accept a non-appearance without explanation, and without explanation, they would manufacture one, and the manufactured explanation would not be kind to anyone wearing a crown. The decision was made. Camilla would attend, but she would attend on terms that made her physical presence functionally equivalent to an absence. No platform, no speeches, no center stage positioning, no moments before the primary cameras. She would be present in the way that a painting is present on a wall, visible but not the focus, not the subject, not the point. When Camilla was shown the evidence at Clarence House, the performance finally faltered. She had been presenting a face of complete composure throughout the entire day, a remarkable feat given what she had set in motion. But there is a specific moment when reality overrides performance, and for Camilla, that moment came when she understood that Catherine was in the room, and that Catherine's gaze across the space between them required no words. The trap had not worked, and Catherine knew it, and Camilla knew that Catherine knew it. Camilla's deepest fear was not punishment. People who have navigated power at this level develop a certain resilience to formal consequences. Her deepest fear was marginalization, being pushed to the edges of the room she had spent so much of her life trying to reach, the center of, being rendered decorative when she had fought to be essential. And that fear, on that night, became her reality. The gala proceeded. To the outside world, to the cameras, to the assembled dignitaries, to the global audience watching the coverage, it was precisely what a Buckingham Palace state event is supposed to be. Seamless, radiant, a projection of institutional permanence and quiet, unshakable authority. Beneath that projection, a sentence was being carried out. Catherine appeared in the ballroom, and the room did what rooms do when someone enters who has understood exactly how to occupy a space. It recalibrated around her. The Rose of Windsor tiara rested in her hair with the settled authority of something that had always belonged exactly where it now sat. She did not draw attention to it. She did not need to. The cameras did what cameras always do. They found the most powerful image in the room and stayed there. William remained close. His proximity was not accidental, and it was not merely affectionate. It was a declaration. In the specific language of palace appearances, a senior royal choosing to remain visibly close to his wife on a night of this significance is communicating to everyone in the room and to every camera recording the room that she is protected, that anyone who believed they could isolate her or expose her to narrative damage had miscalculated badly. Charles moved through the evening with the performance of a man who has mastered the art of ruling behind a controlled expression. But those who knew how to read him could see the weight he was carrying. He knew what had happened. He knew who had done it. He knew that the institutional necessity of maintaining the surface had required him to allow the architect of the scheme to remain in the building, dressed in formal wear, smiling at foreign dignitaries. That knowledge sat heavily. Camilla moved through the same spaces, attended the same moments, smiled at the same people, but the choreography of the evening had been adjusted in ways that required no announcement. She was always slightly out of frame, always a step behind the natural gathering point of cameras and attention. No single person was visibly excluding her. That would be too obvious, too traceable. But the cumulative effect of 100 small positioning decisions was total. She was present, and she was nowhere. Every time the room organized itself for a significant photograph, she was on the periphery. Every time a key exchange took place at the center of the gathering, she was just far enough away that including her would have required a deliberate effort. No one made that effort. The room had received its instructions and was executing them with the practiced precision of an institution that has been managing exactly this kind of problem, quietly and completely, for centuries. Later, when the lights came down and the guests departed, and the machinery of the evening began to deconstruct itself, Catherine returned to her quarters and removed the tiara with careful, practiced hands. That was no triumph in the gesture, no celebration, no exhale of victory, just the particular kind of exhaustion that comes from having navigated something genuinely dangerous without showing for a single visible moment that you understood how dangerous it was. She set the piece down with the same deliberate care she had carried through the entire day, and she allowed herself, finally and privately, to understand the full shape of what had been attempted. This had not been about a piece of jewelry. Jewelry is never really about jewelry in environments like this one. This had been about narrative, about the image that would exist in photographs for decades, about the story those photographs would tell, about who holds the trust of this institution, about who the cameras follow when the most powerful people in the world are in the room. Someone had decided that image should not belong to Catherine. Someone had been willing to commission a replica, to orchestrate a theft, to route the most significant piece of royal heritage through a residential address outside the palace, all in service of replacing Catherine's narrative of trust and continuity with one of doubt and suspicion. The effort was extraordinary, and it had failed completely. But Catherine was experienced enough and clear-eyed enough to understand that the failure of a plan does not necessarily mean the end of the planner's intentions. People who reach for something with that level of determination and find their hand empty do not simply accept the outcome and redirect. They calibrate, they wait, they find another angle, another piece on the board that can be moved without leaving the same traces. King Charles spent the hours after the gala in a particular kind of silence, the kind that is not peaceful but is full, crowded with things that cannot be said and decisions that cannot be made cleanly. He knew when he married Camilla that bringing her fully into the institution would require patience from both of them and from the public. He had navigated years of complicated opinion, shifting perception, and the occasional active resistance of an institution not always enthusiastic about the path he had chosen.
But this was different from difficult opinion. This was different from institutional resistance. This was someone using the resources and the access that came with living inside the monarchy to attack another member of it, not with words, not with public positioning, but with a scheme that, if it had succeeded, would have placed Catherine before an international audience wearing evidence of a conspiracy against her. The question Charles could not escape was the same one that would quietly haunt the palace in the weeks that followed. What does a king do with the knowledge of what his wife attempted when the institution requires him to maintain a surface of unity, and when the cost of that maintenance is a silence that protects the person who acted against his family? There is no clean answer to that question. There is only the choice between different kinds of damage, and the calculation of which damage, absorbed now, prevents the greater damage later. Backstage, the matter of Laura Lopez was handled with the particular efficiency that the palace reserves for things it wishes to contain permanently. No public statement, no formal announcement, simply the quiet, thorough removal of an individual from the inner infrastructure of trust and access that determines how close someone lives to the actual center of royal power. Doors that had been open were closed. Invitations that had been automatic were no longer automatic. Arrangements that had been understood were no longer in effect. Laura would not be prosecuted in any public forum. The institution cannot afford the exposure that a public proceeding would create, but she would not be forgiven in any meaningful sense either. In the monarchy, there is a form of consequence more lasting than legal proceedings, the slow, irreversible withdrawal of proximity. And that withdrawal, once initiated, tends to be permanent. So what does all of this leave us with? It leaves us with a monarchy that survived a crisis most of its global audience will never know occurred. It leaves us with a princess who walked through a gauntlet wearing the most symbolically loaded piece of jewelry in the royal collection and never let the cameras catch even the shadow of what she was carrying. It leaves us with a queen consort who gambled everything on a plan that required perfect execution at every stage and watched it unravel in the most humiliating possible way. Not in public, where she might have salvaged some dignity from the confrontation, but in private, in front of the people whose opinion of her actually governs her existence inside these walls.
It leaves us with a king who must now navigate a household in which the war beneath the surface has escalated to a level that cannot be dismissed as palace politics or normal royal friction. What was done was not normal, and the people who live inside that institution know it. And it leaves us with a question that has no comfortable answer. Camilla has been pushed to the margins before. She has been underestimated before. She has survived forms of public and private rejection that would have ended most people's ambitions entirely. Does a woman with that history simply accept the new terms of her position? Does she decide that the cost of continuing to push is too high and settle into the diminished role the institution has now clearly and deliberately assigned her? Or does she wait? Does she file the knowledge of what went wrong, identify where the vulnerabilities were, and begin working, slowly, without urgency, in the methodical way that the most patient players in palace history have always worked, toward a moment when the conditions are different? Was Laura Lopez a participant who fully understood what she was part of? Or was she, as some may eventually argue, a daughter who loved her mother too much and understood the palace too little? Someone whose panic when confronted by investigators told a story she might have survived telling differently? And will the evidence that exists, carefully preserved in the hands of people who understand exactly what it is worth, eventually become a lever in some future negotiation that we cannot yet see the shape of? Will King Charles at some point find that the silence he is maintaining becomes untenable, that the cost of protecting the institution's surface starts to outweigh the cost of what protecting it is requiring him to absorb internally? These are not hypothetical questions. In an institution as old and as psychologically complex as the British monarchy, they are simply questions whose answers have not yet arrived. What we know is this. On one particular evening, in front of one of the largest audiences in the world, a woman wore a tiara that someone very close to her tried to steal, replace with a fake, and use it as a weapon against her. She wore it anyway. She wore it well. And she went home afterward and put it down quietly, without a word, because she understood that in the place she lives, the most important victories are the ones you never have to announce. The most dangerous thing in Buckingham Palace was never the cameras outside. It was always the jealousy living within. Share your thoughts in the comments below. We want to hear what you think about the future of this rivalry and where you believe this tension is ultimately headed. Don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who follows royal news, and subscribe so you never miss our coverage. And when you're done here, the next video is already waiting on your screen.